How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, we're going to talk a little bit today about the aftermath of Colt Gray. So let me show you guys a picture just in case you are not familiar with who Colt Gray is. Let's read a little bit about him. Colt Gray is a 14-year-old student who's accused of opening fire at Appalachia High School in Barrow County, Georgia. Happened on September 4, 2024. The attack resulted in the death of two students, Mason Schemerhorn and Christian Argulo, both 14 years old, and two staff members, math teacher Christina Ermy and assistant football coach Richard Aspinwall. 9 others were injured during the shooting. All right. Gray was taken into custody shortly after the incident and now faces 4 counts of felony murder. His father, Colin Gray, is also charged with involuntary manslaughter and other serious offenses as he has gifted the AR-15 style rifle to Colt months before the attack, despite a prior investigation into Colt for threatening violence in 2023. This case is notable as it marks one of the rare instances in which a parent is being held legally accountable for the child's action in a school shooting. Looks like they're trying to go for what looks to be close to 180 years. And now there's talk of the way he spoke to his son, basically calling his son a PUSSY and a bunch of other things. And then we also found out that Colt Gray also came from a bit of a dysfunctional home. So it looks like we have a lot of stuff going on. I did a brief update yesterday about the mother actually calling the school saying there was an extreme emergency after he made a text saying, "I'm sorry, Mom." So we don't know what the context is to that. You know, what did she know? Why did she react so quick to that? But today our main focus is on the aftermath of what happens after we have an active shooter. How does the school kind of slowly reopen? And this is going to cover a lot of areas. We broke it down to 10 specific areas, and it deals with the school, law enforcement, mental health professionals, the community. There's a lot of stuff involved once they decide that we can move forward and open up the school. And my friend, Lieutenant Joseph Pangaro, is an expert in active shooters. He has a business out there. We actually help schools kind of make sure they're up to par with whatever would be needed to make sure that their school is protected. So we're also going to be talking about some of that when it comes to what needs to be done with their emergency procedures, their policies. And there's also a sad, outside of the tragedy that happened, one of the things that got to me the most is the math teacher, the gentleman by the name of Richard Aspinwall. And maybe we could talk about this later with Joe. When he heard the shots, he ran outside, and unfortunately he got shot, and the students brought him in, secured him in a classroom, and unfortunately they watched him die. They watched him take his last breath. I mean, how do you recover from that? And then my question is, also the training. Are teachers supposed to run out when they hear that? So there's a lot we have going on, but let me bring in Joe. Hey, Joe, how you doing, brother?
Very good, Anthony. How's everything?
Good. It's good to have you, man. You mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. Hey, everybody, I'm Lieutenant Joe Pangaro. As you can see, I'm in my podcast studio. This is the Blue Heart Podcast. We talk about police-related things, all things law enforcement. We have another podcast that's called Hope is Not a Tactic. That's just starting up, and that's for school safety and security. Pangaro Training, I provide training to law enforcement officers since 2006. We have remote classes, in-person classes. I lecture all over the place, and I write a lot. I have some books out with Blue 360 Media. And Anthony was talking about the work I do for schools and businesses, religious facilities. I do that through another company called Integra Services. And we do threat assessment, staff training, and we try and keep people safe. So I stay as busy as I possibly can to try and save lives.
And Joe, real quick, I mean, we'll dive into it, but you are very familiar with the active shooter out of Georgia, correct?
Yes, I am.
So I just wanted to mention something before we start in. I was following up on Parkland because I wanted to know how long it took for them to reopen the school, just so we can, have a little background for our dialogue. So what I saw here was, in general, they say the best case scenario is some schools may reopen within 1 to 2 weeks if the investigation is swift, damage is minimal, and emotional support is quickly arranged. More complex scenarios, in cases with extensive damage or a prolonged investigation, reopening could take several weeks to months, and then it's usually a phase reopening. Some schools opt for a phase reopening, allowing certain parts of the school to reopen while others remain closed for repairs or cleaning. And then for Parkland specifically, after the tragic Parkland shooting at Majority Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14, 2018, the school reopened 14 days later on February 28, 2018. However, the building where the shooting occurred, that's building 12, remained closed and was later slated for demolition. The school gradually resumed operations with heightened security measures, including additional mental health support for students and staff. Building 12, where the Parkland shooting occurred, was permanently closed following the tragedy. It remained sealed as a crime scene for investigation purposes at that point. Before that, whatever. Later, it was decided that the building would be demolished due to the traumatic memories associated with it. The structure was left intact for some time to serve as evidence in the trial, but it was eventually slated for demolition as part of the healing process for the school and the community. Now, Joe, the reason why I wanted to have you on is because a lot of us kind of really focus on the incident. And I don't think there's a lot of coverage on the aftermath, because eventually I think what happens here is people kind of move on to the next story. And I don't think there's really a strong follow through in the complex reopening of a school that has gone through something as traumatic. Would you agree?
100%. And when you talk about Parkland, where they ended up taking down building 12, that was obviously something that it's hard to go back to a place where that kind of tragedy took place. They did that at Sandy Hook as well. They took the entire building down after the trials or after the investigation was over. They ended up taking down the whole school and moving it to another place. And what people don't realize, you're absolutely right, is that we see these events take place. They're horrifying. Everybody, sending their prayers and this and that. But eventually it moves on to the next terrible tragedy. And, do we actually learn a lesson? But these communities do suffer a great deal when these things happen.
Right. Now, so guys, we have a lot to cover there. There's 10 sections here. So what I was going to do is, Joe's the expert. So I did take some notes, did some research, and I thought Joe could maybe elaborate on each area that we're going to cover. Now, guys, I want to tell you, I broke it into 10 parts. We have coordinating with law enforcement, which basically is right after the crime has occurred. So now we have an active crime scene, a bunch of stuff. So there's going to be that first reaction. Then you're going to have, obviously, handling the crime scene. Then we're going to move to facility inspection and security upgrades. I'm very interested in what Joe has to say about that, because this definitely falls within his area of expertise. Then we have communicate with the school community. Then we have the mental health support and counseling services. Then we have the review and revise emergency plans. Then we have prepare a thoughtful return to school plan. Then we have addressed the emotional concerns around the crime scene, because as we just talked about, the increased security presence, the ongoing monitoring and support, and then that's it. That's the 10. Now, people may not realize, Joe, but there's a lot when it comes to opening this school back up. So to break it down in 10, I wonder if there's a lot of people out there that thought it was a bit more simple.
Well, I think what a lot of people, because I've had people ask me about it and say, what do you are you clean up the blood? And then what do? You bring people in, but it is so much more emotionally scarring to the community and the students. I mean, if you listen to the students in the Colt Gray case, he came to the door, banging on the door, and they looked and they saw he had a gun and he started shooting next door. You talked about the teacher that was killed, and those young students dragged him back inside and watched him die. That's not something they're going to get over tomorrow. And each individual community has more concerns than just the school building and the kids. They don't realize, when I talk to municipal leaders, that if you have an event like this in your community, you're going to have you're going to be inundated with the news. You're going to be inundated with curiosity seekers, with people who are conspiracy theorists. And it goes on and on and on. And the families are sometimes harassed for years by different people who believe it happened, didn't believe it happened. They're anti-gun, they're pro-gun. It is very, very in-depth. And if communities don't prepare in advance for that, and that's where we're all weak here, Anthony, is that very, very few places really take a few minutes and go, okay, let's really do the right thing. Let's really do an assessment. Let's really practice. Let's make sure they do check off the box. Check off the box. This is what we're supposed to do. And then the day after tragedy, they're sitting there often holding the bag, not knowing what to do.
Yeah. Now, Joe, there's a lot here. So the first thing I have is, let me just get to it, is coordinate with law enforcement. So Let me just click to coordinate with law enforcement. And then basically what I have here is you got to basically immediately after the incident, law enforcement will take control of the crime scene. That means the school administration must fully cooperate with authorities to ensure the safety of students and staff. Now, obviously, we know that's extremely important. You know, you have a crime scene, obviously law enforcement takes over. But would there really be any conflict between the school and law enforcement taking over?
I don't know that there actually would be. I've never heard of that kind of a conflict because the school really has no, they have no position at that point. Once that is a crime scene, they can't say, you can't come in here. You're not allowed to come in here. We don't want you disturbing anything. I think people are in shock when these things happen. And I can't imagine, I've never heard in any of the discussions I had of people having a hard time. Does that mean individually? You may have in certain places where they don't like the police, they don't trust the police. I mean, that's a real thing going on in our country today. But I haven't heard that to be a real problem because law enforcement comes in, whether it's a corner where it was a fatal accident or whether it's in your house. We show up at your house and somebody's been murdered in your house. We get a search warrant and we own that house until we're done there. So that's the first thing that's going to happen is there's a lot of things. People have to get their belongings back out of the school. How long can they get their backpacks? Can they get their computers? Do they got personal things that are in there? So all those things have to be coordinated with law enforcement because that entire building and probably the whole property of the school district is crime scene number one, because we don't know, did this person leave weapons in the woods? Did they leave supplies in the woods and then go to the school? So the entire property is a crime scene until each thing is cleared. And that is a major undertaking. So the coordination with the school is, I'm sure you're going to have administrators that can point out, that can help you to guide you through the buildings. I would think our facilities people are going to be absolutely huge. I know anytime I go anywhere to investigate anything, the first thing I find is our people in the custodial staff, the facilities, they know that building and the people inside and out. So the coordination has got to be done very well. And you have to have somebody who's not traumatized to be able to go through that school. I mean, you're talking about teachers and administrators. You know, you and I, the reality of our career is we see blood and guts all the time. You kind of become used to it. But I worked in a school as a school director after I retired from law enforcement. And I saw that the love that these people have for these kids is completely different than what you might think it is until you get in there. And they see them as their children. I mean, they're in loco parentis, but they see them as their children. And to go through a building where 1, 2, 3, or 20 people were murdered would be very difficult. So you have to have the right people helping.
And Joe, it says here, communication with authorities, stay in regular contact with law enforcement to receive updates on the investigation and when it will be safe to access the area. Who from the school is usually the one in constant communication with law enforcement to try to start moving things forward?
Well, you would probably have the superintendent's office or a member of the board, a high-ranking individual. I know on some school boards where I've met with people, there's retired law enforcement personnel that are now on the school board. And they might be someone, if something happens at the school, to coordinate with law enforcement because they know them. They understand, they speak law enforcement kind of a thing. But the superintendent in the district I was in when something happened, the superintendent was the spokesperson for the district, for the board, for everyone. So I would think it'd be one of those two groups.
And if I may ask, well, I know it says communication must be stay in regular contact with law enforcement to receive updates. So is it the school that's kind of pushing for the updates from law enforcement, or should they wait for law enforcement to reach back to them, or how does that work?
Well, I think that's your point of, stay in contact and coordinate with them, because first of all, the families of anyone who's injured are going to be very interested. The families, whoever lost anyone, are going to be interested. There's going to be attorneys involved who are pushing for information. And I hate to say that, sounds cold, but it's true. That's one of the things that you're going to have people, they want answers. They want their stuff. They want to get in there. It's incumbent on law enforcement, in my opinion, when these things happen, to be readily available. I would assign, if I'm the chief of that agency, I'm going to assign one of my officers to be a 24/7 connection to the superintendent or whoever's in charge on the school side, because you're going to cut out rumors, you're going to cut out misinformation when there's a direct connection. Because without that, if you go too long, and I think we've all learned that in incidents, right? There would be an incident take place and we don't hear from the police for 2 days. Meantime, the rumor mill starts going, who's doing what? The cops are in on it. It's somebody connected did it. So you have to have those regular meetings. So we see that now, right? In a school shooting, we see the police chief or his or her representative comes out. Here's what we know so far. And then they tell you, we'll be back in 3 hours, and they update you. That is vitally important for the psychological aspects of surviving an event, to get information, because you got to think about something happening to somebody in your family. They go out to a play and they end up getting very seriously injured or killed, and the police don't want to talk to you. They're not, well, it's under investigation. We're all frustrated by that when we see things going on in our world today. It's under investigation. We can't talk about it. So it's incumbent on law enforcement to coordinate with the school people and have a regular flow of information, a dialogue, so that everyone else can get the information. Otherwise, that healing doesn't happen overnight, but it's certainly not going to get started until there's that communication.
And I don't think when the school's asking for an update on the investigation, I don't think they're asking for specific details to hold somebody accountable. They're just kind of asking, are we safe to move forward? Is the crime scene, secured? I mean, do we have? I mean, right? It's just more of, how do we take the next step forward, right? I mean, they're not really asking for specific details that would violate the due integrity of the due process or the integrity of the investigation, correct?
No, I wouldn't think they would be. I would say, they're not asking for ballistics. They want to know, was there more than one person involved in this? How did they plan it? How did they get in? What was their problems that they started this? Is there any other danger anywhere else? That's really the kind of concerns I think people on the outside have, and that's where the police can go a long way to help people feel not afraid that the next shoe is going to drop.
And it's funny. We'll get to it when it comes to security upgrades. But once they figure out what has happened and more importantly how it happened, I believe in an effort to move forward, in a more productive manner, they're going to have to release some information because we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, right?
Right. I agree. But here's the problem I think we're seeing in this modern era of these kind of shootings. There's a lot of rumors out there on the social media. I mean, social media is good and it's also terrible. There's these rumors that this Colt Gray was transgender because he had the long hair, and there were several other shooters that identified as transgender, and now it's become a big thing. Oh, these transgenders are shooting up schools. There have been some transgender shooters, but I think the concerns there is that there's a political concern, and because they don't want to cause any kind of a problem or any bigger concern. So we saw in the Covenant school shooting in Nashville, we didn't get the manifesto. How come we didn't get the manifesto? It had to be leaked out in pieces because the shooter there was alleged a transgender individual, and they didn't want to hurt that community or bring concerns to that community that people are going to strike back against them, because there's nothing to say if somebody's transgender, they're a school shooter or a killer. But that's the big concern that, hey, they're going to go after that community because this person happened to be a transgender. So I think there's a political component to these things as well. And there really shouldn't be. And I know it would be tough to hear those things. And I think that's part of a plan that has to be created. I think everyone's on notice now after how many of these. You have to have a plan. And no matter how tough it is, unless it's going to violate the investigation in some way, there's another person involved, there's other people who supplied weapons, whatever. If it's just the political ideology of the person who did it, we should know that. And then people have to be adults and not, go after an entire group of people because somebody in a particular group did something bad.
Yeah, I like that. And whatever your political beliefs are, whether you're left, right, I mean, you can't allow that to bias the investigation or bias the needed outcome.
Right,
because
absolutely.
a lot of times people take advantage of this to make it a political message. And then it actually, when they do that, it takes away from the actual matter. It is a quick solution if you would let the experts decide and not push it into a political war.
Right.
The next part is I know you definitely have experience with this. So the crime scene of an active shooter has to be I mean, as you mentioned before, and there's even a spot where they said that he left the classroom, went to get a weapon, and came back. So, I mean, the crime scene isn't just where the area that was shot up, but it could be where he got the weapon from. I mean, how big of a a crime scene could be secured in these cases?
Well, I got to tell you, you sometimes in some crimes you will have multiple crime scenes over an entire community. So that's one of the initial things in the investigation. That's why they want to find out right away as best as they can. That's why they scrub social media. They look all over the place. Is there anyone else involved? Is there a weapon stash? Someone else? There's three other guys hitting three other schools. What are they doing right now? Just like it's akin to a terrorist investigation when you find out that there's a potential terror attack, and then they have to go in, and you can have a crime scene at the house in Sandy Hook. The killer killed his mother first in her bed, shot her and killed her in her bed. That's a crime scene. That the entire house is now a crime scene. Then he got in his car and he drove to the school. That car is a potential crime scene, an evidence thing. The entire property of the school is now a crime scene because you don't know. Did he leave something in the woods to help him escape? We know in Columbine, those killers, they had bombs in their cars. They had things set up, secondary devices, knowing that law enforcement was going to investigate them when it was over. And when they opened their car, the bombs would go off. So you can have a huge area that is manpower intensive to try and secure down, lock it down, and then make sure you get everything. Because in some cases there are more than one person involved.
And I'm reading here when it talks about unauthorized. Obviously, when you have secured the school, there's no unauthorized access except for access from law enforcement professionals looking to investigate the matter, correct?
That's absolutely correct. That crime scene is sealed down only to law enforcement. You can't just go wandering in there. Parents can't go in. That you can't have. The newspaper can't just go running in. There may be opportunities where, based on the investigation, they might bring the press in to see certain things. You might have the release of body cam footage, as we saw in this case, and we also saw in the Nashville case where they showed you the body cam footage of what happened, and they cut out the parts that are obviously could be offensive, the person getting shot, someone dying. But then we see other people out in public. There was a guy, and I think it was Dallas. He was shooting at a bunch of people. They took him out, and he's laying on the street, and he's riddled with bullets and headshots that he took from responding officers. So nobody gets into the crime scene until it is secured, because, not that people would go in and take things, but anytime we go into a crime scene or we come out of a crime scene, we bring things with us, hair and fibers, all kinds of things, and we take things out. We all know that over the years, we have seen some major criminal investigations damaged by investigators in the scene, doing the wrong things, touching the wrong things. I teach a class on criminal investigation. We have some video from some very famous crime scenes that I obtained from law enforcement. And as I tell the officers, take a look at this, and what do you see? And somebody says, there's a giant mag light sitting on the kitchen table. I said, now, do you think that's the victim's family's mag light, or do you think that's a cop's mag light that they put down and they're not paying attention? They're touching things, right? So that crime scene has to be locked down and secure for those reasons alone.
Yeah. So it says here, forensics teams will gather evidence such as bullet casings, weapons, and other relevant materials. I mean, that must be hard just to collect the casings. How hard is that to find each casing?
Well, it depends. They also have to find any bullets that went into the walls, into the lockers, into the ceiling. We have to track those down, and you have to find every single piece of that as best as you possibly can. Some of it will disintegrate on impact with a concrete wall or a steel beam, but for the most part, you can have, depending on how many rounds are fired, you can have bullets everywhere, and each bullet tells a story. Each piece of the forensic evidence is important to see the entire case in its totality when you try to figure out the timeline, what happened. I say all the time, when I go to a crime scene and I teach these young officers, I say, let the crime scene speak to you, right? Go there and look at what you see, right? Take a look at it, walk around it, understand what you're seeing, because a lot of times you will see the progression of events in the timeline. I saw a great special of all things about General Custer and the battle that he had when he lost his life back in the day. And what they did is the forensics people went out there with metal detectors, and they found piles of rifle rounds all over the area where this gunfight took place, and they could trace the rifle rounds back to whether they were the soldiers or whether they were the Native Americans, and they could see their positions. They could then figure out where they moved, and it was really amazing. So there's a lot that can be told just in that information in that crime scene, let alone the horror of a crime scene like that. I've been in some pretty gory scenes, and you go in there, and even for law enforcement people, it is sometimes shocking to the senses to go in and see what somebody can do. And I don't want to upset anybody, but when you imagine probably one of the most horrific scenes had to be in Sandy Hook, you had little 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds shot at close range with an AK-47 type of a rifle. That does unbelievable damage to a human body. A lot of those officers left work and never came back to the job because it was so horrible. I know some of the scenes that I've been at, we had debriefing. We have psychological debriefing after a really bad scene because these things will live with us, right, for a long time. And I had a couple of senior, dusty old dudes who have seen it all, and they were just really upset by some of the things that they've seen in these scenes, and it really bothered them, and they needed help. So the crime scene itself is no easy task, and the bigger it is, the longer it's going to take to get everything right. They could be there for days or weeks.
Now, I know that in this instance, I was reading about the victims that were injured. They said that 7 were injured by gunshots, and there was a total of 9, but 2 of them were not shot. They just may have been injured in the chaos. But they said for one victim, the bullet went right through the shoulder, broke the shoulder, separated it from the arm, and the person has to now go through back-to-back surgeries. That's how powerful the bullet was from the looks like it was an AK. And then so here's something that a lot of people don't really discuss when it comes to handling the crime scene, because remember, guys, we're talking about trying to get this facility moved forward. So one of the things that's the next step after everything's been collected is the crime scene cleanup. So how does that work?
Well, the crime scene cleanup is one of the last steps to law enforcement relinquishing control over a crime scene. And that usually takes place after everything has been gathered, everything's been videoed, everything's been photographed, everything's been removed, tagged, documented where everything came from. And normally the bigger the scene, and I've been in some of these big scenes where you don't just go, okay, I'm done, picking up the bullets. This is a team event. That's why you don't relinquish a place. Sometimes even in a home homicide, you might be there for 2, 3, 4 days, depending on what happened. Is that the entire team then should be making a decision? Do we have everything? Do you want to take one last walk? There was a detective that was on the job before me, and I remember him saying to me, it's probably one of the most valuable lessons that I ever had as a detective. He says, when you're all done, when you're done processing the fingerprints, when you're done taking the evidence, when you're done looking at the facility, whatever it is, when you're all done and you think it's time to go home, don't leave yet. Take a deep breath, because now you're calmed down. When you initially get there, you're going to be hyped up. They're human beings. This is a major case that they're in. But after a while, when you feel, you work through that process as a person, and you would calm down, and they're professional, they get the job done. He says, before you leave that scene, walk around the scene and just look without those concerned eyes. Now just look with the regular eyes. Maybe did you miss something? And I can't tell you, the first time that it actually worked, we had a series of house burglaries, and I got done. This was about the 5th one I had been to. My other partners had been to a couple, and we knew it was the same guy. There was a lot of signature things he had done. And I'm walking around this house after processing it, and about 100 feet away in the woods, I found a pile of cigarette butts. And I said, now that's strange. I could see somebody walking their dog, but why would somebody sit here and smoke 9 cigarettes in the woods? That doesn't make any sense, right? So eventually we made an arrest in the case, and the person confessed and said they used to stand in the woods in the morning and wait till both parents would leave and he would smoke his cigarettes. We went back to other crime scenes and we looked in those areas. We found piles of cigarette butts in most of them. So you want to make sure that you didn't miss anything, that you got everything. And that then leads to, now you can have blood, brain matter, that's horrible, bone fragments. You can have all kinds of physical evidence from the people, biological evidence, all that kind of stuff. And then you would have normally you give it to the victim in the school district. You would give them the names of some crime scene cleanup operations. Now, if you've worked with them and you know that they're good, you might give a recommendation, but that's up to them. Then that crime scene cleanup company comes in and they basically remove all the biological matter, scrub it, and clean it. They can get everything out of that crime scene except for the echoes of the horror. That stays in that building. And that is why many of these places decide to knock the buildings down, because those ghosts, you can't remove them.
That's powerful. And then I know after that, then they start doing the repairs. If they're broken windows, busted walls, they start doing the repairs, but they're really not supposed to repair until the crime scene has been cleaned, right?
Right. And that's why buildings like that, like a school, you see even now they're talking about a couple of the things that they want to do is getting back to normalcy. And that's one of the things that's in the recovery plan. Getting back to normalcy after any tragedy is important for the psychological well-being of the people involved. So they want to get these kids back to school as soon as possible. There's a grieving process. There's PTSD that's involved here. There's counseling. And then there's moving back, which can be one of the hardest things to do, to step back in. But that building, like you said, that has to be maintained, because the defense for this kid's alive. They might want to say, I want to walk the jury through and show you that there's no possible way he could have done this alone. There's another shooter, or whatever the legal theory is. They might want to go to that building and look at it. And we've all seen that when things are changed later on, it's totally different. It's not the same place. Even if they don't take a building down, it's not the same as it was on that day. And that can be damaging. It makes arguments for attorneys.
Yeah, and then they also, obviously throughout this process, there is going to be transparent communication between the parents, the community, because I'm sure that they're going to want to know updates. And it's not going to be, you just tell them, the day before, hey, school's ready to open. I mean, I'm sure they're going to keep them in the process and try to kind of work where everyone feels safe that this is the time it should be open. So it's not just going to be on the school making that decision. I'm sure the community, the parents, it's going to be a pretty a group discussion, correct?
I would think it has to be. In the target school, I would think the school where the attack takes place, that school might not open for a while. Those kids that were there that day have to walk through, and this is where these memories that you have, these resonant memories that you have of that morning. I was walking down the hall laughing with my friend, and shots rang out and my friend went down. Well, every time you walk down that hallway, you're going to relive that trauma. So what they're going to do first, and what it sounds like they're doing, is once they move these kids from the high school back to school, going to school in their routine, they're going to send them probably to other local buildings that they have in the district. They'll make accommodations, or they'll send them to a neighboring district for a couple of weeks. So they get the feeling of going back to school, because you got to imagine every part of that day that was normal until the shots rang out now becomes an echo of the event. So getting off the bus, walking into class, the bell ringing, right? All the little things we don't think of, the little things in the background, going to lunch, the smell of lunch, and then you're back in the building, and that's when the shooting started. So that is the area, and that's how complex this kind of a trauma can be, because it's gigantic trauma, right? It's a really big trauma. It involves, in this case, hundreds of people and their families. So that I would think would have to be a community decision. And I wouldn't be surprised if they took that high school down. Money becomes no object at that point. We can't go back in that building. The kids can't do it. Take it down and we'll build another one. And that's why we see that in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, Joe, I have here like the transparent communication, like we mentioned, provide clear information on the status of the investigation, facility repairs, and any other safety measures being implemented, because while you're communicating, guys. So these kind of steps are not really, one step done, the next step starts. You're kind of bleeding into each other, because while you're doing this, there's also going to be mental health support and counseling service almost immediately made available to the people that had to bear witness to this. The people, the survivors, the families, the victims. But the other thing it kind of touched on what you said, where it goes, you got to reinsure the community. So you want to address any concerns about safety and ensure that the school is taking all necessary steps to prevent future incidences, and offer details on increased security or changes to emergency protocols. So I think once they clean the crime scene and they fix whatever needs to be fixed, then you're going to kind of check the building out, make sure that the building's safe, but you're also going to look for any policy or security upgrades, like maybe more cameras or, right now it's not so much about the policy yet. We'll get to that. We're not really, creating policies to say these are what the teachers got to do, students. No, right now it's more of, is the building safe, right? Or the location
safe physically, because that is going to be, I'll tell you, think about you, think about me as a father, and that school opens up and I'm going to put my kid on the bus or drop them off. They're going to go back in that building. That's going to be hard for me to do. I'm going to want to know, is that place buttoned up? What have you done? How is it safer today than it was on the day that the killer started shooting? And that's where that transparent bit of information, how did they get the weapon into the building? Where were the gaps in the security? Are they still there? Have they been addressed? Will people admit them? We see in Uvalde, we saw the complete breakdown by the leadership there. And that's really what I believe was the problem there. The leadership, not so much the men and women on the ground. They were following their orders, but we saw that complete breakdown, and they thought they had everything in place, and they really had nothing in place. I would want to know, going back to school, who's in charge of this, who's looking out for this, who's making sure that this isn't possible. And that's where the investigation will give us, how did he get the gun in there? Most schools do not have metal detectors, and they don't check backpacks. Most everybody locks their door now, but except for, when schools start and they open the door and everybody comes walking in. You can walk in with a backpack. You can walk in with a weapon. Did he put it in a locker? Did he give it to somebody else? Did he hide it in a closet? Whatever. They're going to want to know that. The school district's going to want to know the exact mechanism of how this attack took place, to figure out where are we weak and how do we prevent that. And what I always try and teach when I do these assessments for schools, businesses, churches, any place, I say, you have to look at the things that are probable to happen, and then you have to go into the world of improbable. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I had people say to me, what if somebody attacked the school like they did in Russia, in Beslan, with a helicopter and landed on the roof of the high school? Are we protected on our roofs? Now, you have to say to yourself, that sounds panicky. It sounds crazy. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No, it's probably not. So we have to look at all of those kind of things. How did he get in there with that weapon? Did they have a lax policy, as you're saying? Did they not have anybody checking? Did they know things? I know there was reports, and you were saying in the beginning here, that his mother had called the school and said, I'm concerned about my son today. Go find him. I think there's danger. How did they react to that? What did they do?
It's funny you said improbable, probable. I actually use same thing sort of, but likelihood and probability. Like, okay, so now there was a shooting at this school, so it's no longer likely, it's probable. Because once it happens, that's it. There's just if you don't react the right way, there's no forgiveness at this point. The likelihood is gone. Now it's probable. And, one of the things when you're looking at the facility inspections and the security upgrades are going to be those metal detectors. If there's any argument about the metal detectors, because people don't want to have their schools look like war zones, and we have to advise them that this is about their safety, right? So would you expect after this that the school would need to invest in metal detectors, more security cameras, stuff like that?
I think what we see in every one of these districts where there's been a shooting, there's that immediate push to get that kind of equipment. We have to have everything now. Now, when we look at statistically, and statistics can inform us and give us some information, we have never really seen a district victimized twice. Like once it happens, you had that wild card, that shooter for whatever reason attacked that school. You don't see Columbine being hit again. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, but we don't see it happening. We don't see Sandy Hook being hit again, but it's possible. So I think we do see in many of these districts after an event, that's when they'll say, I got to tell you, that's when my phone rings off the hook. My phone's ringing off the hook now. We really should have had a threat assessment. We never got around to it. Well, you got lucky today that it was somewhere else, right? But then they'll go, okay, now we need money for cameras. And sometimes, unfortunately, what I have seen is that a district will go on a spending spree. They'll run we're gonna increase the budget. We're gonna increase the taxes. We have to get this money. They borrow it, whatever, and they put in things that are good, but they don't put in the right things. They don't put them in the right way. They get too many of something, not enough of something else. It's kind of like a panic buy I see very often, and that's part what if an assessment does. It looks at all of that equipment and says, okay, here's what you do need. Here's the kind of thing you need. Here's where you would put them. Because I have seen a lot of places buy stuff they did not need. When I went to my school district, I got there and they bought this beautiful visitor management system where you went and you gave them your driver's license and it does 25 things. It was $100,000 they paid for this device and they didn't need it, but they were so afraid. They had to get on board. The salesman made it sound great and they bought it and they only needed a $20,000 system. So that's another thing that an assessment helps you to do. But in the time after an attack, there's all kinds of pushes to spend money to try and seal it up tight.
Well, I figure at that point too, also a lot of people are paranoid. So, people are scared. People are afraid of liability. So I think people figure the more money you spend, as opposed to being strategic with what you're doing, it's like, oh, but we got to do more. It's like, no, hold on, guys. I mean, this is not about putting in, 5 metal type, but rather where we putting them in. Because sometimes it's about strategically putting them in locations where that one spot will cover all this.
Correct.
By putting them there. Right. And, I have just one other thing when it comes to the transparent communication. It also mentions that you got to reinsure the community. So I'm assuming after you, do the upgrades and stuff like that. I see. Here's my thing. So the school was a soft target. So that's why the kid was able to go out, get a gun, come back in. It was a soft target. Maybe he chose to go out later because there was no one monitoring the doors, which means that maybe the doors weren't locked when he returned back. I don't know. I mean, maybe I can't bring him in when I first start the day because everybody's there, but later on, there's no one covering the doors. I could just walk out, prop the door, and come right back in, with the weapon. Could be, we'll
Sure.
see if that's the case. But how do you make sure that in your effort to build up the facility, in your effort build up, like I work in a prison, to build up the school, how do you make sure that when you're giving information to the public, you don't give them too much to make the school, a vulnerable again?
Yes, absolutely. And Anthony, you're hitting on all the touchstones. When I do an assessment, I write a very detailed, very granular report. We look at over 120 different things in the school. We do penetration testing. We try and get kids to let other kids in the door. We do everything you can think of. It is really a very in-depth review that I do. And then I provide this report. They get one for each school, and then they get an overall district-wide report. Well, that report is then shared with the school board and with the administrators in each building. So I discuss their building. Here's what I found. Here's what I think you need to do. I give them a timeline. Here's things you can do right away for low or no cost. Here's things you want to budget for next year. And here's things you're going to budget for 3 years down the road. And then I offer to the board and to the superintendent, I said, I will attend a public meeting and answer the questions, because when people are afraid or they're worried about school security, if there's an incident 2 towns over and everyone is up in arms, what are we doing about our school safety? And they get that superintendent on the stage or the school board members, they want to know what you've done. What do you have in place in this school? And you're right. If I tell you, I'm telling the bad guys. So I can't reveal everything. So the reason I offer to take the slings and arrows is that I've done enough of these that I understand really what people want to know is that the district has really done something. And we all know it's like having the local police department investigate themselves. Nobody's really confident in that. Even if they're doing up and up job, You're not confident. You're investigating yourself. So here's the school. We're going to do our own assessment, right? When they bring in somebody like me from outside, I'm an outside set of eyes. I am loyal to the parents and the children of that school. That's what I'm there for, and to tell them where they're weak. So when I come in, and you might see the superintendent peppered with these questions: do we have window glazing? Do we have this? Do we? And they can't say. They can't say, because that gives away their stuff. Then I'll take over and say, let me see if I can answer that question. And basically, I know where the people are coming from. I know what they want to know. And in the best way that I can, I tell them, your school is now safer. What they've done, your school board, your superintendent, they have spent the right amount of money. They have gotten the right equipment. I can't tell you, because if I tell you, then everybody knows. But I would have my child go to this school, if of course they do everything I tell them to do. You know what I'm saying? So, and I go through that process, and every single time I've had angry people who they want to, I want to see that report. I don't care. My kid goes here. And by the time I get done, and sometimes it's a half hour, sometimes it's 2 hours up there talking to these people, and they have legitimate concerns. And in every case, I've been able to calm them down. And I think they get it, that I'm here to make sure their kids are safe. And I've had people follow me out to the parking lot, and I saw one guy, he was really hot in there. And I said, well, here we go. This is going to be a problem. He says, hey, Lieutenant Joe, I really want to read that report, but now I understand why I can't. And if you think they did the right thing, then I'm good with that. And that's very important, because you can't tell people what you did. Then everybody knows. You don't know what they have in place. And there's a lot more technology and equipment and things out there now than there ever were. And the public doesn't know about them, but they're available.
Yeah, we always, even with us, I mean, there are times when you get specifics, and there are times where you're just going to get generalities. I mean, generalities may not be as threatening to safety and security, but once you start asking for specifics, it's more of a need to know.
Yep.
Like, I mean, do you need to know? So the next spot I got, now this is something that I know definitely you have some expertise in this too, because this is all part of the response. But let's get this through here too. You got the mental health support and counseling. This should be ongoing, right, Joe? The moment the incident occurs, there should be people coming in to make sure we manage the chaos. But I also think there should always be people present, even when the school opens. Right? I mean, this is something that is definitely needed almost right when the incident happens, for however long it may be needed.
Yeah, actually, you're 100% right here again, Anthony. This mental health is the one thing that is missing in most of what we do in our country. We don't talk about mental health, and we should. So one of the things that I wrote an article, I write for Campus Safety Magazine a lot. And I wrote this article called The 3 Pillars of Survival, because people ask so many questions. What do we need to do? What do we need to do to make everything safe? And what should we do? And I tried to boil it down so it would be easy to at least get a grasp on it. And I wrote this article, The 3 Pillars of Survival. If you cover these 3 pillars as much as you can, you'll have a much safer facility, no matter what it is, right? So the first one is preparation. That means training, equipment, drills of value, doing everything you can in preparation, understanding the probability and the likelihood of something happening, and preparing for it. Number 2 is communication. How do you communicate? How does a teacher on the 2nd floor of the high school sees a kid in the parking lot with a rifle? How does that teacher tell the whole school to lock down? We got danger coming, right? And then the 3rd one is notification. How do you call the good guy and good girl guns to come and help you, right? How do you get that notification out? Well, I always added in there that mental health was an extremely important area. And there's a district in upstate New York. I did their assessment in 2018. And I mentioned this very heavily. They have 10 schools. And I think they had 2 mental health counselors full-time, which is good. They got 2 full-time people. But obviously they're overwhelmed with that many schools. So one of the things in my report said you should consider 1 per building. At least 1 per building, so that they get to know the kids, they can know the problems, they hear things, they do things. And they had me come back in 2023. It's been a 5-year look back, which is the right thing to do. 3 to 5 years, you should go back and look again. Did we improve? Did we have problems? And when I went there, the superintendent, a very nice man, very caring man, he says, we now have 22 full-time school counselors, psychologists in our district, constantly working with the kids, Anytime there's a rumor, there's a drawing, there's something concerning, they are right on it. And I was overwhelmed by that so much I had to rewrite the article, and I call it the 3 pillars of survival plus one, and that one is mental health. So yes, it should be there before an incident, but as soon as people are gathered, you got to think of the chaos of a shooting, and now that it's over and police are on scene and there's no more shooting and people have been moved out of the building after they've been evacuated or whatever, and they're at a waiting site or they're at an off site now, they are traumatized. They are traumatized. So you need people there immediately for every person that was in that building, and probably the parents. There are some horror stories about psychological things and how they were done wrong. But that goes from then, and it has to go on for as long as it is needed. And I know that in Sandy Hook, there are still some people who are suffering. The parents are still suffering. Michelle Gay, she has an organization, Safe Schools, and she was her 6-year-old daughter, Josephine, was killed in that attack. And I've written articles with Michelle, and we've done interviews and stuff, and she has survived very well. She had good mental health, and she survived well. But if we don't have that mental health follow-up, this is a kind of a trauma. How much more vulnerable do you think you could feel? And I think of this as a father. If one of my children was killed in a school shooting and I could have done nothing to help them, right? How would I feel about that? You would go through every moment of your day. Was there anything I thought of? Did I hear of anything? Did they know anything? Did I pay attention? And that would go into the future. And people can heal from trauma. They can, but it's intensive. And to answer your question, very long-winded answer is yes, they need to have it immediately after, they need it before, and then they need it for as long as it needs to go on.
Yeah, and Joe, I want people to know we haven't even decided, how we're painting the picture now. We haven't even opened up the school yet. These are just measures that are being taken to open up the school. So this is to prepare the students for going into that environment again, to make sure that they're ready. But then also, once the school finally opens, to be, kind of right there with them to guide them through it, to try to keep whatever positive momentum they have going. Because I would have to agree that the opening day, and we'll get to that because we're not at the opening day, there's still one more thing left. But with that said, the opening day has got to be the scariest part, because you don't know how the initial reactions are going to be upon their return. And I definitely believe it's got to be a very controlled effort. But the other thing that I want to mention, kind of running at the same time you're doing your security checks, increased measures of security, maybe getting some extra SROs if available within the budget. But this is review and revise the emergency plans. So basically, these are the plans that are the reactive measures, which include what the teachers must do, what the students must do, law enforcement. And then also on top of this, I don't think we're opening up the school until we know that everybody's been properly trained, which means that the teachers also have to go in, and you have to have mental health for them as well, because they went through something traumatic, right? So, I mean, so when it comes to, Joe, this is what I have for review and revise emergency plans. I got review how the active shooter response was handled and identify any areas for improvement. Conduct debriefs with staff, security, and law enforcement to learn from the incident. Revise the school emergency response plans based on lessons learned. Implement changes to active shooter drills, lockdown procedures, and evacuation plans. And for staff training, provide updated training for teachers and staff on the revised emergency protocols to ensure everyone knows their role in an emergency. How does that play out, Joe? That's a lot there.
There's a lot there, and it comes down to how serious they take it. And I don't want to say that schools don't take it serious. They have a lot to do to educate our children. This whole area has popped up in the last 25 or so years, and we have to now make sure we don't get people killed in school, right? From an interior threat, which is the internal threat, somebody in our school, student, staff, somebody we let in, or the external threat, somebody who attacks our school and comes in to hurt us. The updating of policy, procedure, and plans. You really need best practices in there, and that means you have to do research. You have to understand. I look at every single one of these incidents that takes place, and I go through it, and you say, okay, well, here's 5 things we knew happened before. Here's 3 things didn't happen a lot, but they have happened. And here's 3 new wrinkles in this kind of a shooting. So that helps with the probability and likelihood discussion. But I see a lot of places when they do their drills, they don't do realistic drills because they're afraid. They don't have time. When we do our assessment, we ask for an impromptu lockdown. All right. So lots of places, they have their lockdowns on the third Thursday of the month because that's when they do them. They tell everybody, okay, lockdown, and they go around. Some states have said that they should all be announced drills because you don't want to traumatize anyone. And then other places say, well, the shooter's not going to call you and say, can I shoot you Tuesday at 3:00? It's just going to happen, and you have to be ready to respond. So there's a lot of controversy out there about this in this world of stuff. But I like to do this impromptu drill for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a leadership test of the administrator in the building. I say, hey, listen, I'm going to do a lockdown like in 5 minutes. Can you do it? And I've had some of them get apoplectic and run out of the room to call the superintendent. How dare I ask a question? Because they're not ready to save anybody. Then I've had other people say, I'm really uncomfortable with it, but you know what? I'd like to see how my school responds. So, okay, let's do one. And then I've had other people jump right in and goes, yes, let's do it right now. I want to see how this goes. So there's this whole wide range of how people react. Training for the staff. You got to figure in a district like that district, Appalachia. Did I say it right? Appalachia. I want to make sure I say it right.
Appalachia.
The school building that was attacked, the high school. Well, you got a bunch of other buildings there that weren't attacked. They are going to be scared to death to go back into their buildings thinking that it could be a copycat. What if it's somebody else? So you really have to use that mental health component. And then you have to prepare everyone, train them. And this might mean bringing everybody in for 3 extra days of overtime in the summertime to go over the drills, to go over the things that are going to help them to survive. We look at, like I said, 120 different things. We look at lockdown locations. Where do you send these kids? When you send them outside, do you have rally points? Do you have places to meet? And sometimes they don't think of any of that stuff. They just think of running out or locking down. So that policy and procedure has got to be updated. It has to have best practices. And then you have to take it realistically. We can't live paranoid. I say that all the time. We can't be paranoid that something's going to happen. We have to be aware and prepare, right? So that if something does happen, we are mentally prepared. We do fire drills for 100 years. Why? So that when there's a fire and they ring the bell, we all know what to do. We get up and go. That's why we do lockdown drills. So our kids know what to do. And the kids are not as traumatized as people would say they are. Individuals are. But in general, I got to tell you, we've done these impromptu lockdown drills, and I watch them lock down, and I'm with the principal and we're walking around, and the principal calls it off. And out of the bathroom comes this little 5 or 6 year old little girl comes out of the bathroom. She says, hi, Mr. Principal. And he says, what were you doing in the bathroom? She says, well, teacher told me during a lockdown, if I couldn't get in the classroom, go in the bathroom, sit on the toilet, put my feet up. So that's what I did. That little girl saved her life, right? These kids will do what we teach them if we don't panic. So policy, procedure, realistic drills of value are things we have to add and make sure we do them right. Make sure we do them appropriately so that people get value out of it. They know what to do in that emergency. They're not paranoid. Because you have fight or flight. We all know that, right? Comes to us since we're human beings, right? The lion jumps on the trail. You fight the lion or you run from the lion. Well, there's a third part to that equation of human response. There's fight, flight, or freeze. And we freeze normally when we have to do something we never thought about. We're not sure what to do. We don't know what to do. And that's when we're going to freeze. So that's why policy is so important. Drills of value are so important. Empowering people to survive. We're not doing this. We're going to get killed. People are going to, no. When this happens, we are going to be prepared to save ourselves, just like that little girl. And we can do it.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we've also went through active training where I work, and it's tough. Active shooter training, it's tough because there's a couple of things. One is once you secure an area, even if someone's trying to get in begging for help, you can't open the door because you don't know if that person is in on it or not, and that's very hard to do. It may be easier said than done, but even just in the drill, that was very hard to do because if you have the pressure added, it's like, oh, help me, let me in. I can't. And then the other thing was what you can use around you, but as a weapon, whatever it is, to help fight back. But this was the one part too is when is it time for you to engage, and when is it time for you to back away? And I felt a lot of people didn't understand that, like didn't know, like, should I engage? No, you're supposed to move back. Well, when do I engage? And It's just so much going on. But Joe, do you is that part of the emergency plan? Like, I mean, you try to basically show people what's around them that they can use, maybe to block the door, or if they get to a point where they have to stand their ground, what's a good weapon in class that they can utilize?
Yes, absolutely. It's based along the run, hide, fight kind of a program we've all heard of. I went to some specialized training. There's a program out there that lots and lots of schools love. And I went to it to get certified in it, to teach it, and to see what it was all about. And I don't mention it by name, but I went to it, and it's very popular out there. And I didn't like it because their first thing to do is to put the kids out. If the shooter's in the building, then you get out of the building. Put the kids out the window and run. And I said, you got little 5, 6, 7-year-olds, or you think they're really going to run away from the building when their teacher's in the class? What if the teacher can't get out of the classroom? Now you got these kids running. What if there's a creek? What if there's a highway? The best place you can be is locked down in a classroom with the door sealed and the window closed, right? So when I do the run, hide, fight, the parts that I try and instill in people is that if you can run and you think that that's the best thing to do, and you have an opportunity to get away, that might be your best bet. If you can't run away, then you might have to hide. Well, where do you hide? How can you hide? That's why practicing in advance, knowing where you can lock down, where you can hide is important. And then the third part is if you have to fight. So when you talk about policy and procedure, I've read a lot of policy. I redo policy for people all the time. I go over it, and some of it is, they take it out. Here's our policy, and they blow the dust off it. We did this in 92, right? You have to update all the time. And I've looked at these policies, and they say the teacher will do this, the teacher will do that, the administrator. By doing that, by having ironclad things that they have to do, you're blocking them into a very bad position. So what I suggest when I create these policies is multi-optional responses, so that the teacher, if they're properly trained, they've done drills, so they understand what they should be doing. In that moment, that teacher has options to make a decision. Maybe she or he can get the kids out the window and they all can get away. And that teacher decides to do that. They're still within policy. You got somebody breaking the glass on the window. Well, you're now at that point, you're being engaged. You're either going to fight or you're going to die, or if you can run, you should run. So multi-optional responses, I try and put them all in there, that the teacher should look at have situational awareness, know what their options are in every part of the building, and then take an action. Because if you lock them in, they will only lock down. And that shooter got in that room and killed people when they had a door in the classroom, they could have fled. That's a terrible thing, right? So we don't want to lock people into something that they can't react to. So that is very important when it comes to doing the drills. So the hardest part, though, Anthony, of that run, hide, fight is when I teach the fight part. You ask, when do you engage? Well, most of us out here are not killers. We don't think about killing anybody. We don't think about having a fight for your life. It's not part of what we do. And the reality is, the key to surviving when you have to fight for your life is committing to your actions. So what does that mean, commit to your actions? That means thinking about it in advance. If somebody was coming at you with a weapon or trying to get through that door or fighting their way in, what would you do? So you say, what do you teach them? Well, I teach them lock and block. When there's a lockdown, you cover the window, you lock the door, you block it with furniture. Now, if they get through the glass and they're trying to reach the door handle, now maybe you hit them with a fire extinguisher, spray it in their face, bash them in the head, knock the gun out of their hand, if that's what you have to do. The committing to your actions is the hardest part, because people are not, we don't really raise people to fight for their life. So a clear example, I have a daughter and 3 sons and my wife, and I told all of them, in an age when people because they're all like to go to the city and do stuff. And I said, when you're there, you could get carjacked, right? And we see this out of control now in all our cities. If somebody wants your car, give it to them. Get out of the car. Let them drive away. Insurance gets you another car. If they get in the car with you and want you to go somewhere, don't go there. Because we know what happens when somebody drives you off into the hills. You don't come back. So what I tell them all is, you crash the car. As fast as you can, crash that car. Well, won't the person shoot me? They might. But the chances are, once the car's crashed, they know they might get caught. they'll probably get out and run. If not, if they get you up in those hills, you're not coming home anyway, right? So that's understanding I have to do something. So, and I'll give you a very quick example here. I don't want to take too long. When I was a young patrol officer, I was probably on the job 2 years, and there was a bunch of stolen cars out there, and I'm sitting on this traffic circle, and here comes this car. The guy gives me the face. I run the plate, stolen car. Now I'm in pursuit. I'm pursuing him. Well, we went into the town next door that I didn't know much about the town next door, and it was nighttime. And I'm chasing this guy. I'm trying to look at street signs and call it in. Headquarters, I'm in pursuit, back when we could do pursuits. And I'm chasing him. He's turning in and out of streets. I can't pay attention to street signs no more. I have no idea where I am. It's dark, and I'm chasing him. He crashes. Over the fence he goes. What do? Headquarters, I'm out on foot now. Where are you? Where are you? I don't know where I am. I'm over the fence. We go through the yard. He goes over that fence. I follow him. We get to the third fence. He stops at the third fence as I come over the second one. And he turns and he looks at me. He's bigger than me. He's stronger than me. And he realized he ain't running no more. He's tired. He comes running at me, and I go running at him. We are now in a battle for my life, because I wasn't there to kill him. He was there to kill me. And he's choking me, and I'm seeing the little fishies. And there was a moment in there when I realized I couldn't get him off, and I was going to die. And I basically thought about my wife and my son at home, and I made my peace with it. I was going to die in this backyard. And then there was something inside of me that said, no, don't do that. And then I fought like an animal, a person I didn't know who I was. And I managed to get him off of me just as the troops came piling through the yard. And I realized when I'm driving home in my car in the quiet of the night, as I'm driving home thinking about my wife and son who were in bed sleeping, have no idea. I almost died in a backyard. And I'm thinking about that. And I said, I almost let him kill me. And I couldn't believe that. And I said to myself at that moment, to this moment today, that will never happen to me again. I will never give in. They might take my life, but I will fight until they take the life out of me. I committed to my actions. And that's what it means. And people in our schools and businesses, they don't think like that. That's why I write articles like this. That's why I give lectures about this stuff. We need to think in advance. What would we do? So I hope that answers your question.
No, above and beyond, Joe. And I'll tell you something. A lot of people, they definitely can relate to what you just said, 100%. So hopefully people that are watching that relate to never give in, because you're right. Sometimes the people that, wind up losing their lives, if they just could have fought back just a little bit longer, you never know. You never know. And obviously your life is worth fighting over. I know that eventually we have to do the phase to reopen the school, but I want to mention something. I looked this up too, where it said address emotional concerns around crime scenes. And I noticed some schools, they repainted the whole place a lot. So maybe even put some furniture up, make things look a lot different. So when the kids initially walk in or the teachers walk in, it's not a reminder of the place that it once was, but rather something different. Or some even create a memorial, or maybe even both, just to have a place that the kids could kind of heal. And I think that's usually done before you start opening the school. Have you seen people kind of repaint or just redo the whole school in general, so it's not, or that building, wherever it happens, so it kind of remove, yes, it's the same location, but it doesn't look the same.
Yeah. Psychologically, that's what you're doing there. You're trying to make it not that place where the terror took place, which it goes along the lines too of taking down the building, putting up a new one. Well, repainting, changing the thing, setting up a memorial. A memorial is important for us as human beings. Why do we have graveyards? Why do we do these things? We put up stones and monuments to people that we want to remember, because that is a part of connecting us to someone who's gone or has done something great or suffered. But we're there, we're remembered, they're not forgotten. And I think by not forgetting the victims makes us feel, maybe as parents and as teachers, that they're not gone. We do remember them, they're still with us. But changing that physical building, I think, is an important thing. One thing that I teach municipalities when I talk about this, and you say a memorial, a lot of times where something happens, people will show up and they will leave flowers and teddy bears and all kinds of stuff. And depending on the situation, that can be a mound that is gigantic when you think about it. In Sandy Hook, in the middle of the town, somebody left a couple of things and then some flowers. And next thing you know, in a couple of weeks, it was so big, it was blocking the traffic in downtown. And it's something they never anticipated. And it got to the point that it was affecting business. And they said, well, we have to move that memorial. But who's got the guts to move that memorial? That memorial is a connection to those victims. And we love them. We're not moving that memorial. And this is something that people do not think of in the recovery process, because it's not just the school, it's the entire community that's going to suffer. People who are not related to the victims. Maybe they live near the school, whatever it is. So when a municipality creates a plan, they have to plan on something like that. And as you and I both know, people who are not in our business, they see some of the things we do and talk about and deal with as really strange. Who would think of a thing like that? But I tell them all the time, you should figure out where in your town you would have a memorial if you had a mass casualty incident and people wanted to bring things, right? In Buckingham Palace, they put them in front of the gate, but it doesn't block the traffic. And I said, Lieutenant Joe, how could you think of a thing like that? Well, the reality is when it happens, and it's going to happen somewhere, this is going to be a problem. So we need to think in advance. How are we going to deal with every part of this? The actual incident, the pre-incident, preparing, the incident itself, then the recovery from the incident. And that is all part of it. So trying to figure out all the little things that would affect not just the school, not just the kids and the parents, but your entire community is going to be affected by this. And that has to be part of the conversations. You have to sit down and really think through this and figure out, for your community, how would this work? How would it not work? And try and come up with these ideas so that you're more prepared.
Yeah, and the next step when it comes to increased security persons, I remember a while ago, everybody was talking about armed teachers and was this big controversial discussion. But it's like, guys, armed teachers, you got SROs, you got retired law enforcement, part-time law enforcement. So I think the dialogue for the armed teachers is kind of lessened because you have that presence from those professionals. And then it shifted to having guns in school to begin with. Now stop. I mean, you got to stop. I mean, if you don't have a presence, again, it doesn't mean people are like, oh, you're making it a war zone. No, it's to protect. But the soft target are the targets that are not able to protect themselves. So when you have an SRO who's trained, that's their job. They carry what they're either used to be law enforcement or still is, but working part time. I want that in my schools.
Yes,
I want that 100% in my schools. And I think, you know what it is, Joe? I think for us being in the work that we do, we know that there's always the wolf. We know that somewhere along the line, there's always the wolf. And I'll be honest with you, I rather, not to the extreme, but hear me out, because I'll kind of give a bit of a comparison to extreme. I'd rather have my kid in an armed, secured fort all day than a vulnerable target.
Oh, of course, nobody wants their kid to get hurt. So that argument, I was asked to do give some opinions of some of the school districts that when I do the assessment with the board, what do you think about arming teachers? And I said, you know what? You have to be professionally trained to wield a weapon, to know when to shoot, when not to shoot in a crowd. And I can only imagine that. I know there's lots of people in our schools that could be probably trained properly and be okay. The problem is, I just envision this, crossfire down a hallway with a bunch. Because you got to remember, when the thing happens, not everyone's sitting in the classroom. There's going to be kids out in the hallway running, and who are you shooting at? Right? Law enforcement is trained to do that on a daily basis. I carry a gun every day, so I'm very disciplined about that weapon. And I could always see some people, right? Maybe if you had somebody who had military experience and they were an administrator, having them carry. I don't have such a problem with that, but having every teacher having a gun, I just see that as a potential for a really bad problem. Have SROs in there. Get your SROs in there. I know when I went to my district, the first one I went there, I said, listen, I'm permitted to carry a weapon as retired law enforcement. Would you like me to carry a gun? And we had 10 schools. And at first they were like, oh, yeah, thank you, but no. And I got through the back channel that, they don't know you. And the idea of a gun in the school is really freaking them out. And then we had a couple of incidents that were not horrible, but they were bad enough to scare everybody. And I got called to the board, and the board said, would you be willing to carry your gun if we allowed that? And I said, yes, absolutely, I would. I can't be everywhere in 10 schools, but I might be close enough to do something. So at least there's some chance for protection, right? So I'm all for that. I see some of these states, they have AR-15s in the principal's office. If everybody's perfectly trained, maybe that might be a response. But we know how fast these things go. These are not, these are not battles, gun battles. This is somebody who has an opportunity. They start shooting, and it's over very quickly. There was a show, a special on a news show where they took this district where all these people were concealed carried people, and they wanted to carry in their school. They were teachers, and they put them through some scenarios. And it was very interesting. This one woman had been carrying, I've been carrying 15 years. And this person is banging on the door, and gets in, has an airsoft gun and comes popping in. And she panicked. She dropped her gun when she saw the rifle. There was another guy who was, again, a long-time concealed carry guy, and he started shooting in the panic of it. And even though it was a drill, he started shooting, and he hit 2 people in the room and then missed the bad guy, and the bad guy got him. So a gun in there on an untrained person is not the answer. A trained person with a weapon, you have a fighting chance.
Yeah, and it's funny when these discussions were battling, it was more of the political side. It's like the middle was, hey guys, it's either no guns or guns on teachers. No, the solution wasn't even on either one of those sides. The solution was armed professionals, but nobody was bringing that up because it was political. They had the active shooter, and I'm going to tell you something, guys, just from my own experience. If people give you either or scenarios, stop. You expand it, because either or traps you. Most of the time the answer is somewhere not within the either or of the extreme, but rather in the middle. I mean, a lot of people were literally thinking armed teachers or no armed teachers. And I was like, what do you mean? You don't need either one. Just put someone that's trained, put them in the middle, be done with it. Right. So I have 2 more areas. This is the part with the opening of the school. Obviously, it's a very controlled, strategic open. And Joe, tell me if you agree or not. I believe it's maybe the first couple of days are more optional. Maybe there's some hybrid. Maybe if it happened in a different building, that building's still not in use. You still try to open up in the areas that weren't as affected. But this obviously plays a part, because this is where you're trying things out. So all your resources got to be made available, your mental health, your extra security. I mean, you really got to have things in play when you try to phase this open, correct? I mean, if you do phase it, Joe, what do you mean by phases? Do you start with the older grades? You start with the younger grades? I mean, what's this phased reopening?
I think the whole idea there is that you can't just go back to normal on day one, because that takes preparation. I could see things, and I haven't seen this, but I always thought this would have been the thing to do. What do we when school starts every year, they have back to school night, and people come at 8:00 at night and they mill about and they walk through the hallways. New school for the kid. They're going to middle school. They're going to go visit the middle school or the high school. You could have a great presence of law enforcement there, invite people to come in a non-tense, non-school day event, and walk around and look at their classroom and get a feel for being back in school. You could do that. Bringing back the kids, the younger kids, unless they were victimized in the event, they probably would do better than the older kids, because the older kids think about it more. They know more about it. They read about it. Little kids aren't watching the news about this going on. They know about it because they do the drills. But I think, phasing in means you don't just start on day one. All right, everybody back to school like it's normal. Our goal is to get back to normal. But I think you'd probably have to do a hybrid. You'd have to do a couple of days in school, maybe a couple of days online, to get everyone past that initial panic that it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again. Let them get used to it. I think that's when people talk about phasing it in. That's what they mean.
It also helps with your resources that you have available. Like if you open up and let everybody in at once, I mean, how many mental health people do you have there? How many? And then also, I'm assuming the controlled reopen is first. Let's make sure our staff's on point. Let's make sure they're okay. Let's make sure they're trained for whatever revised policies we have. And then once the staff is good to go, I'm assuming that the person that's getting ready to open the school should be making sure the staff is okay. I mean, after you take care of all these measures, the staff is good first, because if the staff is not ready, then you can't bring in the students. I know sometimes a lot of people just want to kind of get the success, and they measure their success by getting the kids back into that school, and we're resilient. And it's like, hold off. We haven't even seen if the teachers are okay right now, or the staff, right? I mean, have you seen let's try to move it quicker, because they may believe the success is in the outcome of bringing the students back to show how resilient this community is.
Well, I haven't seen that. I talked to Principal DeAngelis from Columbine, and he's a guy that would understand how it went back. What I have seen from traumatic other kind of events when they go back to school is that the whole thing about resilience and we're strong and this and that, that's not, they don't just go back day one and start, we are, Columbine strong. That's something that took months of messaging and getting people ready that we're going to survive this. They have the memorials, they have the grieving, they have the people helping everybody with the PTSD. And then they go back and we are strong, just like after 9/11, right? Remember that USA strong. Well, we grieved for a long time where those buildings were still burning for months, but it was much time after that we could recover from that as a nation. And then move forward that, hey, we got a guy standing on a pile. You're all going to hear from us. That felt good. That empowered us that we're going to survive. And that's all part of the messaging that has to go out. And I think that's why when you see that, we're strong, we're this, we're going to do, that's psychological underpinnings that, we're strong. This isn't going to take us down. And I think that does help everyone. But making sure them teachers are ready first is absolutely 100%. If they're not comfortable going in, the kids are going to feed on that. They're going to feel that fear. Every time you hear a car backfire, it's going to be horrific. So all of that has to take place well in advance. And that's why it takes often very long to open up a building that's been victimized. Sometimes it's just easier to take it down.
Yeah. And as I said, when they open a school, it does take a lot of courage. So for the people involved, it truly to keep people motivated, to try to get them to want to go back to school. I could just imagine how overwhelmed everyone is on that day, just to, make sure they answer any concerns, including concerns of paranoia, like you mentioned, the likelihood versus the probable, or the improbable versus the probable. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I have here, Joe, is the ongoing monitoring and support. So obviously, I think for a while you do need that increased presence, that security presence, that mental health presence. I mean, obviously that makes a lot of sense. I mean, eventually, obviously you try to bring things back to normal, but I think what helps with that is, I think right at the very beginning, when you are starting to reopen, you got to have audits. You got to make sure that, the new policies are being acted out on, the new systems are being utilized the way they should be utilized, to follow up, to make sure that you got good momentum. And then eventually, when you feel that it's a solid momentum, however long that could take, because that could vary. But once you feel that things are going in a right direction, then you can start welcoming, what you would want, a more, I don't want to say the word lax, but you don't want a paranoid environment. So eventually you got to balance you got to balance the new security measures, but then you also have to try to get some normalcy in this all too, right?
Yes, going back to normal is the key to healing. That's what's getting over something that's traumatic, is that you're back to normal, you're safe, and now you can get back to normal. Doesn't mean you ever forget the pain or the trauma that you did, but
you're not back to normal the first day, right, Joe?
No,
I mean,
no. So I think your points are very good. You'd have to have quality training so that everyone feels really good. You have to monitor it. You have to message it constantly, and make sure people know that we are more safe. You'd have to see that physical presence of law enforcement outside or inside the building. You'd want to see that. And the one thing about us as human beings is that we are resilient. And I think if a lot of those needs are met, that we see, it's not, we can physically see that there's police here now, that there's cop cars out front, that we are safe. We have protocols in place. We have equipment. We see the teachers are not afraid. As we see that and we start going through our days and the weeks and weeks and weeks that go by, we start to live normal again. The burials are over. The grieving is over. You get through that first anniversary, right? That first anniversary can be very traumatic for lots of things, because you're coming back to that exact date, right? And then here you are again, and you relive it. But, after the second or third year, doesn't have as much power. You might have a memorial service, right? And then you move on, and then it feels normal to be safe again. And I think that's where the healing process has to lead. to get us back to. We can't hide. We can't hide. We have to live, even though these things happen.
Hey, that was a great thing that you just said, by the way. It feels normal to be safe again. That's what I was trying to get. Like, you have the intense oversight at the very beginning, but obviously that energy is going to get expended. I mean, it just is what it is. And I think when you have that intense oversight, ultimately, it's really just to make sure that, they're able to handle what they can handle until you're able to say, hey, we could step off. And one day that will happen, because I think it's a balance of making sure that everyone is ready. What we mean by ready is everybody's ready to take on the new responsibilities that they may have, but also everybody is prepared for what could be a lesson oversight. You may not have the police presence as much as you did, but it's balanced out, because now you have people that are ready. They're more prepared. It's not the school it was before. And the funny thing is, it's not something that has to be advertised or promoted. It's something that we know in our hearts, because we went through something, we became better at it. And now it's just, we're not as vulnerable as we were before this happened. So I think there's also a inward trust that once it's built, you're able, to just say, okay, you know what, we can do this. And maybe there's even a push to say, hey guys, yes, we appreciate the oversight, but it's been a couple of years, and I want to, I love what you said. I want to provide an environment where the kids feel safe. And there's that balancing out of when it's okay to say, hey, you guys can go here. I think we're okay. We got it here within the measures in play. Hey, Joe, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would. I'd like to say that I appreciate being on here, Anthony, getting to talk to your audience. And for anybody that's got children in school, or if you're a school administrator, or you have anything to do with this, make sure they do the right thing. Make sure they get an assessment. It's not something to take, and I don't mean that to come to me. Get an assessment. Find out where your strengths and your weaknesses are. Close them gaps, and make your environments, whether you're a school, a church, a business, anywhere, that your people really are safer. If we are aware and we prepare, we're not paranoid, we can see danger starting to build, we pay attention, we train everybody correctly, so that when they hear something or see something, or there's a post, or there's a journal, or there's something, that's people step in and take action. We need the mental health people to be in place, so that when somebody is having a problem, we identify them because they said something or did something. We act on it quickly so we can prevent. It's much better to prevent one of these tragedies than to mop up the blood and try and survive. So that's what I would say to everybody out there. Do the right thing. Go to your schools, go to your business, say, hey, what do we do? Why aren't we doing more? Right? That's what I did to my schools. I volunteered to go give it to my kids' schools. I'll do an assessment for you. Right? That's what I want to say, Anthony. We can make a difference here. We can't stop everything, but we can stop a lot of them, and we can respond to them better with better equipment, better practice, better training. We can survive better.
Yeah, and guys, just my closing is, eventually the news moves forward. Story's not as popular. You may hear about it, like Joe said, for the first year, the anniversary, but eventually all lessons. So the resilience is what stays with you, what stays with that school long when you're long past being the headline. And I think truly when it comes, after an incident from this, it's all about working together to bounce forward. I mean, that's truly what it is. So, again, if you guys are following up with the Colt Gray, I thought this was a good addition. I think a lot of people talk about the incident itself, but they don't really talk in length like this or in depth like this of what it takes to rebuild, and just to know that even if it happens in 2 weeks, we said that Parkland was 2 weeks or something like that. Look at all the stuff that has to come in play almost within that 2 weeks for stuff to start moving forward. It was just an amazing dialogue, Joe. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.